Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to discuss another interesting topic, and that is specifically more of a continuation from my previous automation series about AI. And today we're going to discuss specifically automation in hiring and how that could very well resemble money laundering. And I know that might sound a bit provocative, but first let's explain that laundering is the process of transforming something whose origin would be unacceptable into something that appears legitimate. And so, for example, money laundering does not erase the crime that produced the money, but it obscures the origin. And in essence, this is how automated hiring works nowadays as well. Discrimination does emerge from data, feature selection, optimization objectives, historical recruitment outcomes, proxy variables that correlate with protected characteristics, and a model that is trained on decades of biased data on hiring decisions does not simply learn who performs well on those interviews and outcomes, but also who gets the job. So we have historical hiring decisions becoming training data, then training data producing predictive models, and predictive models influencing future hiring decisions. And those decisions then generate the next generation of training data. And then we have that propagation after each iteration reinforcing the statistical patterns of the previous one, allowing historical inequalities to become increasingly difficult to detect. And for disabled people, this problem has become substantially more severe. Many disabilities are invisible to automated systems, but their effects are not. So, for example, nonlinear employment histories, gaps caused by illness, reduced working hours, assistive technologies, atypical communication styles, or unconventional career paths, they can all become statistical signals that reduce a candidate's ranking score, despite having little relationship to their ability to actually perform the job. So, in essence, the system doesn't necessarily identify who is disabled, but its proxy variables are sufficient enough to do that. A ranking algorithm can systematically disadvantage disabled people and applicants without ever explicitly processing disability itself. So from an engineering standpoint, this is one of the defining challenges of machine learning is optimization against proxy variables that they can reproduce discrimination even when protected characteristics are explicitly excluded from the dataset. And what makes that particularly concerning is the distribution of responsibility across the AI supply chain. So, for example, we start with the vendor developing the recruitment model. The model is trained on historical data sets whose biases may be poorly understood or inadequately audited. The employer purchases the software believing it provides objective, efficient decision-making, and the applicant receives only a rejection. So at every stage, accountability becomes increasingly fragmented, and the vendor can argue that the employer configured the system. The employer can argue that the model simply generated recommendations, and neither party may be able or willing to explain why a particular applicant received a lower score. And the result is a system where responsibility becomes diffused precisely when accountability is needed most. For example, in the UK, the employment discrimination law generally allows disabled applicants to challenge discriminatory treatment. However, exercising those rights depends upon being able to identify how a decision was made. So when a recruitment decisions are produced by opaque automated systems, that evidence becomes substantially harder to obtain and to challenge. And obviously, without meaningful transparency, auditability, or explainability, applicants may suspect discrimination while lacking information to demonstrate that. And legal rights become increasingly difficult to enforce because this technical decision-making process remains inaccessible to the very people it affects the most. And this is where regulation, of course, becomes critical. For example, the European Union's AI Act recognizes that AI systems used for employment are high-risk systems, requiring obligations related to risk management, to documentation, human oversight, and transparency. The legislation is not perfect, of course, but it does acknowledge an important engineering principle that when automated systems make decisions, that significantly can affect people's lives, accountability cannot be optional. But, for example, the United Kingdom has taken a different approach, relying primarily on existing legislation rather than a comprehensive AI-specific regulatory framework. And even though equality law still applies and employers remain responsible for discriminatory outcomes, the absence of a dedicated AI governance can leave substantial practical gaps around transparency, auditing, procurement standards, and technical oversight. And the result is not simply regulatory uncertainty, but it creates opportunities for biased systems to operate within limited scrutiny, while it considerably is affecting applicants, and it becomes harder to understand that or challenge that in any decisions that are affecting them. And ironically, what is happening simultaneously on the other side is that double standards surrounding artificial intelligence become impossible to ignore. Because if an employer relies on AI to determine whether a disabled applicant deserves a human interview, the process is described as innovation or efficiency or digital transformation. But if that same disabled applicant uses AI to compensate for executive dysfunction, for chronic pain, for communication barriers, or other impairments in order to demonstrate their genuine knowledge and abilities, the conversation suddenly shifts to authenticity and whether the work is theirs or whether they should be allowed to do that at all. So the difference is not necessarily in the technology or the algorithm. The difference is actually who benefits from that. And when AI is used to exclude people, it is frequently assumed to be objective. But when disabled people are using it for accessibility and to enable them to participate in society, to understand social structures, to participate in institutions, then it is treated with suspicion. So this is not only a technical inconsistency, it is a huge governance failure and accessibility failure. And ultimately, it is a failure to recognize that technology should be evaluated not only by how efficiently it makes decisions, but also by how fairly those decisions can be understood and challenged and to be held accountable. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that was interesting. I hope that you learned something new today, and take care.